Do you know that behind the soul and passion of R&B lies heartbreaking secrets where HIV/AIDS claimed some of the greatest voices in music, cutting short their brilliance and leaving fans in shock? From Sylvester, the dazzling icon who lit up the disco and R&B world, to Eazy-E, the hip-hop pioneer whose influence reached far beyond rap, these stories remain raw and unforgettable. Here are 15 most tragic HIV/AIDS deaths in R&B history. Jermaine Stewart. In the mid-1980s, Jermaine Stewart broke onto the global scene with a message that was both playful and wholesome. His breakout hit, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," became a worldwide anthem. It shot into the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100, dominated R&B charts, and made Stewart one of the most recognizable voices of his generation. His high-energy stage presence, sharp fashion sense, and warm tenor voice placed him among the brightest young stars in R&B. But behind that upbeat message of self-control and fun without pressure, Jermaine Stewart would face one of the most devastating battles of the era. The 1980s and early 1990s marked the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and the disease carried both fear and stigma. For Stewart, his career began to slow by the early 90s, though he remained respected within the industry. Friends and colleagues would later reveal that Stewart kept his health struggles private. There were whispers in the press about his declining appearance, but he rarely spoke openly about what he was facing. By the mid-1990s, his condition worsened. Stewart's final years were spent largely away from the spotlight. He moved back to his family in Illinois, where he focused on his health, his faith, and personal relationships. Reports indicate that he tried to keep his spirits high despite the progression of the disease. Close friends described him as someone who never lost his smile, even as he grew frail. In 1997, Jermaine Stewart passed away at just 39 years old due to complications related to AIDS. His death was a shock for fans who had not realized the extent of his illness. Interviews after his passing reflected both admiration for his talent and sorrow at how quickly the epidemic was cutting down artists in their prime. One associate recalled, "Jermaine had such joy in him. Even when he was sick, he kept reminding us that music lives longer than the body." That message rings especially true because even today, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off" remains a steady sound on radio and a cultural touchstone. Bobby DeBarge. If Jermaine Stewart represented youthful optimism, Bobby DeBarge embodied the darker tragedy of talent colliding with personal demons. As the falsetto-soaring frontman of Switch, and later a member of the famous DeBarge family, Bobby's voice defined late 70s and early 80s R&B. Songs like "There'll Never Be" and "I Call Your Name" became hits with his falsetto voice, unmatched in intensity. For many, Bobby was the crown jewel of the DeBarge dynasty, but behind the flashlights, Bobby was fighting wars on multiple fronts. His life was marked by a series of painful struggles. Bobby was open about being abused as a child, and as he rose to fame, he turned increasingly to drugs. His battles with heroin addiction derailed not only his personal health, but also his career. Still, when it came to music, he remained a genius. His siblings often credited him as the backbone of their artistry. But in the 1980s, while trying to revive his career, Bobby contracted HIV. The diagnosis came at a time when the disease was not only deadly, but also surrounded by silence, judgment, and misinformation. Friends later revealed that Bobby lived in denial for years, refusing to discuss his status openly. In interviews, those close to him described him as defiant, refusing to let the illness define him. Yet the disease progressed, and his health began to visibly decline. During a short prison sentence in the late 80s, Bobby's condition worsened, and he emerged frail but determined to keep performing. By the early 90s, Bobby's struggle with AIDS became undeniable. His once powerful frame had diminished, but he still tried to record and mentor others in the industry. In his final years, family members described how he fought bravely but also quietly. He spoke about God and redemption, even as he faced the inevitable. In 1995, Bobby DeBarge passed away at the age of 39 from complications of AIDS. His death devastated the DeBarge family and the broader R&B community. His brother, El DeBarge, would later speak about the pain of losing Bobby, acknowledging how much of the family's talent and drive had come from him. Friends remembered him as someone whose falsetto could cut through glass, but whose spirit was tender and broken by life's hardships. The tragedy of Bobby DeBarge lies in what could have been. Had he lived longer, many believe he would have continued to write and produce hits, shaping the sound of modern R&B. Instead, his story became one of the earliest high-profile examples of how AIDS was ravaging the R&B world. Yet even in death, Bobby's artistry lives. His voice on Switch Records still sends chills, and his legacy remains one of both brilliance and heartbreak. Kenny Green. The 1990s R&B scene was filled with smooth harmonies, soulful ballads, and heartfelt storytelling. And Kenny Green stood at the center of it with his group Intro. As the lead singer and principal songwriter, Green helped deliver songs like Come Inside, Ribbon in the Sky, and Love Thang, which made the trio a fan's favorite of the 90s urban radio. Beyond his group, Green's pen was golden. He wrote for heavyweights like Mary J. Blige, contributing to her breakout album What's the 411, with hits such as Reminisce and Love No Limit. To insiders, Kenny Green was the type of artist destined to be around for decades. But Green's career would take a devastating turn when rumors began to spread in the late 1990s about his health. By 2001, he revealed publicly that he was battling AIDS. This was a rare and courageous admission at the time, especially in the hyper-masculine world of R&B where vulnerability was often hidden. In a striking interview with Vibe magazine, Kenny Green admitted his condition and spoke candidly about the realities of living with HIV/AIDS. He said, "I've learned who really cares about me. I've lost a lot of friends, but gained true ones." His honesty was groundbreaking. For an R&B star to step forward at that time and acknowledge his illness was almost unheard of. But by then, Green was already in decline. Reports from those close to him describe a man who remained spiritually strong but physically weakened. He continued writing music and mentoring others, even as his health worsened. Kenny Green passed away in October 2001 at just 32 years old. His death was a blow to fans and colleagues alike. The R&B community mourned not only the loss of his talent, but also the bravery he displayed in facing the disease openly. Many artists later praised him for breaking the silence, for showing that HIV/AIDS was not something to be hidden in shame. His willingness to talk about it helped humanize the struggle and encouraged conversations about the epidemic in Black communities. Friends who spoke after his death described him as generous, witty, and deeply passionate about music. One collaborator recalled, "Even when he was weak, Kenny would light up when he talked about melodies. His whole being came alive with music." That spirit remains in the records he left behind. Ofra Haza. Ofra Haza was more than a singer. She was a cultural bridge, a voice that carried both the weight of her heritage and the promise of modernity. Born in 1957 in Tel Aviv, Israel, to a Yemenite Jewish family, Haza grew up immersed in the sounds of traditional Middle Eastern music. From an early age, her voice stood out, rich, touching, and powerful enough to move audiences across linguistic and cultural barriers. By her teens, she had already begun performing with a local theater group where her talent was impossible to ignore. What followed was a career that not only made her one of Israel's brightest stars, but also introduced her to the global stage. In the 1980s, Haza burst into international recognition with her hit song, Imni Nalu. Built on the foundation of an ancient Hebrew poem, the track fused traditional Yemenite rhythms with contemporary electronic production. The result was groundbreaking, making waves in Europe and the US. The song topped charts and was later sampled by global artists, including Eric B. and Rakim in hip-hop. Her voice became instantly recognizable, blending the mystical tones of her roots with the accessibility of modern pop. For many, she represented a rare fusion, the past meeting the future in one captivating performance. But Haza was not simply a pop star chasing fame. She was deeply respected for the authenticity she brought to her music. She carried her Yemeni culture with pride, often performing in traditional dress and staying true to her heritage even as she experimented with Western pop and electronic music. Her artistry was about representation, about showing the world that music could transcend borders while honoring where one came from. This made her not just an Israeli icon, but an international ambassador of world music. Her success also translated into recognition within Hollywood and beyond. She contributed to soundtracks for major films, lending her vocals to productions like The Prince of Egypt, where she voiced Moses' mother in the original and multiple international versions. To this day, her performance of the lullaby Deliver Us remains one of the most poignant moments in animated film music. In the late 1990s, news broke that Ofra Haza was seriously ill. It later came to light that she had contracted HIV, a fact she kept private until her final days. In 2000, at the age of 42, she died of AIDS-related complications, shocking fans and colleagues worldwide. The revelation was met with grief, but also with controversy as her family and the Israeli public struggled to come to terms with both the illness and the secrecy that surrounded it. Sharon Redd. Sharon Redd was a powerhouse vocalist, a disco queen whose voice had the ability to shake dance floors and stir emotions at the same time. Born in Norfolk, Virginia, she found her way into music early, performing in musicals and later joining the ranks of Bette Midler's Harlettes as a backup singer. By the late 70s and early 80s, Sharon had carved her own lane as a solo star with hits like Can You Handle It and Beat the Street, making her a beloved name among disco and R&B lovers. But the disco era came with its excesses. For Sharon, her later years were clouded with health challenges. Friends began to notice she was not the same Sharon who once commanded the stage with endless energy. By the early 90s, her health took a serious dive. Rumors began to spread in the press and music circles, and eventually it became known that Sharon Redd was battling complications from HIV/AIDS. The news hit her fans hard because, at the time, HIV/AIDS was still heavily stigmatized, especially in the entertainment industry. Unlike today, where conversations are open and celebrities can serve as advocates, in Sharon's time, many suffered in silence. Sharon reportedly kept her struggles private, never making public statements about her condition. It was only after her passing in 1992 in New York that the truth fully came out. Sharon had so much more to give. She had been working on new material and even hinted at a comeback before her health declined. Instead, the world lost her voice too soon. Fans and fellow artists mourned, and her music became a memorial to her strength and artistry. Today, her name still circulates in disco circles, with her records seen as timeless. Paul Delph. Paul Delph's talent within the world of music was undeniable. A skilled studio musician, singer, and songwriter, Paul brought depth and artistry to every project he touched. He had a gift for blending R&B and pop elements with emotional weight, making his work resonate with listeners even if his name wasn't always on the marquee. In the mid-1980s, Paul was diagnosed with HIV at a time when the diagnosis carried not just medical consequences, but also social stigma and isolation. Instead of giving in, Paul channeled his struggles into his music. His recordings became more personal, reflective, and haunting, capturing the emotions of someone staring mortality in the face. Those who knew him often described his songs as painfully honest, yet beautifully crafted, giving listeners a glimpse into the human cost of the epidemic. Paul's health declined throughout the 90s, and in 1996, he passed away from AIDS-related complications. He was only 38 years old. Klaus Nomi. Klaus Nomi was a German singer who became one of the most unique and eccentric performers of the late 1970s and early 1980s. His style blended opera, pop, and electronic sounds, creating a theatrical experience that made him stand out in the new wave scene. He was known for his striking stage presence, wearing futuristic costumes and makeup that made him look almost otherworldly. His voice was just as extraordinary, going from baritone to soprano with ease. Audiences were mesmerized by the mix of drama and music he brought to every performance. However, Nomi's promising career was cut short when he fell ill during the early days of the AIDS crisis and his health declined rapidly. He became one of the first well-known figures to die from AIDS-related complications, passing away in 1983 at just 39 years old. His death shocked fans worldwide, but it also. Despite his short career, Klaus Nomi left behind a legacy of bold creativity. He remains an icon of individuality, remembered not only for his music, but for his courage in being unapologetically different during a time when acceptance was rare. Renato Russo. Renato Russo was a Brazilian rock star who gained fame as the lead singer of the legendary band Legião Urbana. Known for his poetic lyrics and passionate performances, he became a voice for an entire generation in Brazil. His songs often tackled social issues, love, and personal struggles, resonating deeply with audiences. Renato's stage charisma and lyrical honesty made him one of Brazil's most influential musicians. However, behind the success, he struggled with personal battles. He was diagnosed with HIV during a period when discussing such matters was heavily stigmatized in Brazil. Despite his illness, he continued to make music, pouring his emotions into his art. By the mid-1990s, his health began to decline, yet he remained active in the studio, determined to keep creating. In 1996, Renato Russo passed away due to AIDS-related complications at the age of 36. His death marked a painful loss for Brazilian music. Fans mourned not just the artist, but the honesty and vulnerability he had always shared with them. Today, his work continues to flow well with younger generations who are still discovering his music and are able to show appreciation for the depth of his artistry. Renato Russo's legacy reminds the world of the human cost of the AIDS epidemic and the brilliance of an artist gone too soon. Tony Scott. Tony Scott was a lively R&B and dance singer whose career in the late 1980s and early 1990s brought energy and flair to the music industry. She became known for her dynamic voice and her ability to blend soulful emotion with danceable beats, earning recognition in Europe and beyond. Tony wasn't just another singer trying to ride the wave of the era's booming club sound. She carved out her own space, bringing depth and substance to tracks that could just as easily have been dismissed as party anthems. Her singles, especially in the early 90s, resonated with fans who were looking for more than surface-level entertainment. Tony Scott had a knack for delivering performances that were both infectious and powerful. Her voice carried a rich, soulful quality that tied her firmly to the R&B tradition, but her beats and production leaned into the dance and house scene that was exploding globally at the time. This unique fusion gave her music an international appeal, allowing her to reach audiences that crossed cultural and geographic boundaries. Performing live, Tony lit up stages with an energy that audiences couldn't ignore. Her confidence and charisma gave her an edge, making her a standout in an industry that was saturated with talent. For many of her fans, Tony's music wasn't just about moving to the rhythm, it was about feeling something real, even in the middle of the dance floor. She embodied the spirit of an era where music was becoming more global, more experimental, and more emotionally raw. But behind the bright lights and unforgettable performances, Tony Scott, like many artists of her time, faced personal battles that the public rarely saw. Her life was tragically cut short, with reports linking her death to complications related to AIDS. It was a devastating loss, not only for her fans, but also for the broader music community. The 1980s and 1990s were marked by the AIDS crisis, a time when stigma and fear overshadowed the stories of talented individuals whose lives were stolen too soon. For many artists, including Toni, the silence surrounding the illness was as painful as the disease itself. Her passing is a reminder of the untold cost of that epidemic on the creative world. While her career was still blossoming, and her best years may have been ahead of her, Toni Scott left behind a legacy that can't be overlooked. She proved that R&B and dance could merge seamlessly, creating tracks that still connect with listeners who stumble upon them today. For fans who remember her from her prime, her music remains a bittersweet reminder of what was gained and what was lost. Though her time was brief, Toni Scott's contributions continue to matter. She represented the lively cross-pollination of genres at a turning point in music history, and her voice is still remembered as part of that legacy. Toni's story is one of talent, resilience, and tragedy, but above all, it's a story of music's power to connect across time, even when the artist is gone. Frankie Ruiz. Frankie Ruiz was more than just a singer. He was a fire that burned bright across both salsa and R&B, leaving behind a legacy of rhythm that continues to echo long after his passing. Born in New Jersey in 1958, he grew up surrounded by the sounds of Latin music, but never limited himself to one lane. Frankie had a gift for blending salsa with soul, taking influences from R&B, and creating a style that made people want to dance, yet also listen closely. His voice carried raw emotion, smooth but passionate, and that mix propelled him into international stardom. The 1980s were his kingdom. With hits like Tu Con Él and La Cura, Frankie owned the stage. Crowds filled arenas to feel the energy that only he could deliver. Behind the fame was a battle he kept private. Frankie was diagnosed with HIV, but instead of retreating, he kept performing, his body getting weaker, but his spirit refusing to give in. He would sing until he could barely stand, his audiences often unaware of the storm raging inside him. By the mid-1990s, his health had begun to visibly fail, yet he still recorded, still smiled, still gave every ounce of his voice to the people who adored him. He spoke in interviews about wanting to leave something that would last longer than his life, and he did exactly that. On August 9, 1998, Frankie Ruiz passed away at only 40 years old, claimed by AIDS-related complications. His death sent shockwaves through the Latin and R&B communities. Fans mourned, not only because they lost a singer, but because they lost a fighter who never stopped giving his gift even when life tried to silence him. Frankie remains celebrated today as the voice that taught us that music can outlive pain, disease, and even death. Shannon Jackson. Shannon Jackson might not be a household name for everyone, but for those who lived through the nights of R&B clubs in the late 80s and early 90s, her presence was unforgettable. She carved her lane in music with sounds that fused R&B, dance, and club rhythms, creating a groove that resonated with both underground audiences and mainstream ears. Her songs were the kind that pulled people to the dance floor without permission, filled with energy and that raw spirit of fun. Yet behind the nightlife and the flashing club lights, Shannon Jackson was quietly wrestling with a diagnosis that showed no mercy to its victims in that era. HIV crept into her life and began to strip away the vibrancy she carried so naturally. And the battle was even more difficult for her because she didn't just have to carry the weight of the disease, but also the stigma that comes with it. What made her story powerful is that she never completely disappeared. Even as her health declined, Shannon stayed close to music, showing resilience in the face of fear. Her battle mirrored that of many musicians who were trying to hold on to their art while society turned its back on them. Eventually, the complications of AIDS claimed her life, cutting short a career that could have grown even bigger. Her name deserves to be remembered because her sound represented an era of experimentation and freedom. Shannon Jackson was part of that wave of artists who made R&B expand beyond its borders, adding a pulse that shaped what club culture became. Her passing was not just a personal tragedy, but also a reminder of the many voices stolen by AIDS at a time when help was scarce and judgment was everywhere. She may not have filled stadiums, but those who danced to her music knew she had the gift to light up a room. And that gift, like her memory, continues to shine. Tony Thompson. Tony Thompson had a voice that made time stand still. He came out of the doo-wop tradition, that golden era of harmony-rich singing groups, but found his way into R&B circles as well. His smooth tenor, tender yet commanding, made him stand out among singers of his time. He was born to sing, and those who heard him knew it immediately. From the beginning, Tony's career was defined by his devotion to music. Whether he was part of a group or performing solo, his performances were heartfelt, filled with a sincerity that audiences could not resist. His sound carried the warmth of the old-school doo-wop days and blended it with the more modern R&B flavor that was rising in popularity. This balance gave him a timeless quality that kept fans loyal. But Tony's story, like many of his peers, was shadowed by the HIV epidemic that swept through the music world. In the late 80s and early 90s, the disease seemed unstoppable, and too often it targeted artists whose lives revolved around vibrant communities and constant travel. Tony contracted the virus and soon had to live with the reality of a slow but painful decline. At that time, treatment was limited, and the fear surrounding AIDS made it almost impossible to live openly with the diagnosis. Despite his struggles, Tony continued to perform for as long as his health allowed. His voice did not fade easily. Friends and fans remember him singing with the same heart even when his body was weak. He refused to let the illness take away his love for music, and that refusal became his quiet form of resistance. Tony Thompson eventually succumbed to AIDS-related complications, leaving behind a legacy that deserves far more recognition than it often receives. He was a bridge between eras, carrying the soul of doo-wop into the energy of R&B. His death is a reminder of the countless talents lost during that dark chapter in music history. Yet when you hear recordings of his voice, you realize that his gift was too strong to ever be forgotten. Paul Jabara. Imagine the glittering world of disco and R&B in the 1970s. Now picture a lyricist and performer standing behind some of the era's most unforgettable hit songs. That was Paul Jabara. From the moment he penned Last Dance, the Oscar-winning shower of glitter moment from Thank God It's Friday to co-writing No More Tears, Enough is Enough. For Donna Summer and Barbra Streisand, Jabara shaped the soundtrack of a generation. He had a flair for melody, a sharp sense of drama, and the kind of presence that made stage backgrounds come alive. But the part he didn't let the world see was what really happened behind the lights and applause. He fought a secret battle against the deadly disease that would later claim his life. In 1992, as the AIDS epidemic continued to claim lives in the creative community, Paul Jabara joined the list of talented figures defeated by its merciless grip. It was often whispered, never declared. He died from complications related to AIDS. In his final months, friends gathered to sing "We're Gonna Win," a song he wrote like a rallying cry against both the disease and the stigma. Yet his illness remained carefully veiled in public. When he died in Los Angeles at age 44, obituaries spoke only of a long illness. Despite the cover, his death cracked open doors. Jabara was part of the movement that inspired the red ribbon as a symbol of AIDS awareness. His life and passing reminded the world that creativity and vulnerability walk hand in hand. His music lives on in dance halls, musicals, and playlists that spin relentlessly. Every time It's Raining Men thunders in a club or Last Dance plays during credits of a movie set in that golden era, the echo of Jabara's brilliance rings out. Jabara's life didn't just end in tragedy alone. He remains a spark and a reminder that even in darkness, creativity can still shine brightly. When you hear those iconic songs, know that behind their joy lay a man who fought bravely, silently, and left behind more than music. He left a legacy. Stephen Grossman. Close your eyes and picture the early 1970s. The singer-songwriter era is blossoming, fueled by folk, introspection, and raw emotion. Then comes Stephen Grossman, a voice that dared to be authentic at a time when authenticity could cost you dearly. His album Caravan Tonight was not just music, it was a quiet rebellion, the first major label record openly embracing gay themes. Every note carried the weight of truth, every lyric pulsed with courage. His sound was soft, haunting, and unforgettable. Critics took notice, and Rolling Stone called the album one of the most auspicious debuts of the decade. Yet fame was never his goal. He was driven by the need to create without filters, to sing what he felt. But as his voice resonated, the shadows of AIDS crept closer. By the late 1980s, Grossman was battling Kaposi's sarcoma. His health declined sharply, and yet he recorded again at the urging of close friends who refused to let his legacy fade. Even when he could hardly dress himself, he was coaxed into the studio for one final burst of creativity, just weeks before he passed away in San Francisco in 1990. He was 39 years old. His passing barely made headlines, even in LGBTQ+ circles. Yet in its quiet, it left a violent imprint. He was stolen from us before his voice could evolve, before his message could span more ears. But that album, Caravan Tonight, remains. And when Something in the Moonlight surfaced in 2011, it was like a posthumous whisper from Grossman's soul. Fragile, honest, eternal. Eazy-E. Eazy-E was never about subtlety. The raw energy of NWA exploded pop culture. No warning needed. He was the face of gangsta rap, the voice of the streets, the controversial king of controversy itself. But what happens when the unstoppable meets the invisible? In February 1995, Eazy-E was hospitalized with a violent cough. Within days, he was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS and shocked fans around the world with the news. He had been living fast, speaking truth, flipping society upside down, and then he was vulnerable. Imagine going from commanding stages and making headlines to releasing a handwritten letter explaining, "I have learned this thing is real and it does not discriminate." His honesty shattered illusions at a time when many refused to even whisper the words HIV or AIDS. 1 month later, on March 26, 1995, Eazy-E was dead from AIDS-related complications. Thousands filled funeral halls to pay respects to the man who had told stories no one else would. His death sparked something unexpected, a wake-up call. Hip-hop was shaken, and behind the grief rose a wave of awareness. Urban Aid benefit concerts followed. Public service messages began targeting Black urban communities, and artists like Salt and Peppa turned tracks into education. Eazy's passing launched a movement that forced the industry and the culture to confront a crisis. He stopped using rap to heal others. Instead, his death became the lesson. That life can be cut violently short, and that even voices that scream the loudest can fall in silence. But long after the funeral, his music continues. Every time a beat drops, every time a bar defies expectations, there's a hint of Eazy-E's impact. His turnaround from rapper to reluctant activist was swift, tragic, yet very unforgettable. To uncover more intriguing stories among Hollywood celebrities, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Catch you in the next one. Catch you in the next one.